Hey Kev, how's it going?
Oh, I'm ready. I'm
Yeah,
ready.
man,
I'm doing
we're
good.
in the thick of it now. We're on to chapter three here. Love, charity, and forgiveness in the Greek and Roman worlds.
In the ancient Greek and Roman worlds, morality was shaped by an ideology of dominance, where power dictated right and wrong, meaning altruism and care were almost exclusively reserved for one's own family, social class, or city. While thinkers like Plato and Aristotle celebrated high forms of love, such as pederasty for personal cultivation or deep
Hmm.
friendship based on mutual virtue,
Yeah.
their ideas focus on self improvement rather than helping distant strangers or the needy. Wealthy citizens engaged in Urgetism, probably pronounced that
Hmm.
wrong, by funding public buildings and civic events. But this giving was driven by a desire for personal honor or a need to prevent social riots, rather than genuine sympathy for the impoverished. Furthermore, the concept of unconditional, penalty free forgiveness did not exist in classical thought. Offenses required either retribution or formal atonement. Ultimately, Jesus introduced a radical shift into Western culture by redefining love, charity, and forgiveness as selfless, freely given gift aimed at helping those in need, transforming how society views human equality and social responsibility.
So Ehrman is like trying to differentiate Jesus from his milieu. And in so doing, he's talking about concepts of love that already existed and that, Jesus would have been to some degree or another conversant with. There's going to be kind of a split, and we'll get into more of his Jewish context in a minute, but we're going to get into the Greek and Roman context now. And so we'll just explain why that is at least a part of his context. It is often said that the Septuagint is kind of the most important document for the New Testament.
Mm.
Without the Septuagint, you get no New Testament, and nothing like the New Testament theology that we have, because all of the writers, as opposed to Jesus and his disciples, had to translate Jesus and his disciples' Aramaic into Greek. And so maybe something should be said about this as well. Why are they all speaking Greek, yet the empire is Roman? The reason why is because before the Romans, Alexander, about 3.5 centuries prior, had gone through that whole Mediterranean, ancient Near Eastern region, and conquered for him what was the known world at the time, and they set up what were called satrapies, and so within these satrapies, these generals set up institutes of Greek learning, basically for those who are going to administer a kind of Greek but broken up Greek empire, not quite as unified as Rome was at times. And so, anyway, many Jews were living outside of Israel, but even those who were living within Israel and were a part of any kind of government administration spoke the Koine, which means the common Greek. The Septuagint was written. It's called Septuagint because of this mythical idea that it was written simultaneously by 70 rabbis who didn't consult each
Mm.
other, and they all at the same time came up with the exact same
Mm.
translation of the Hebrew Bible. Um, Miracle of miracles, I guess.
Yeah,
But that whole
it's like the
thing,
King James. Yeah,
right? Yeah, well, right. It's
similar.
the holy English, inspired by God,
Yes.
King James.
Yeah.
So that's the English that God speaks Himself. Some of the writers of the Gospels and the letters and just some of the documents that we have in the New Testament. They're all in Greek, so they all did know the Koine, but some of them didn't even really know Aramaic or Hebrew very well at all.
Yeah.
And like it's very clear that they were just going off of the Septuagint. Just like when you're translating, you're looking around for concepts that you think might be comparable. And there's a lot of famous like might even call them mistranslations between the Hebrew and the Greek that caused a lot of interesting things in Christian theology. Probably most famously, the idea of a virgin birth, which is not in
Yeah.
the original Hebrew Bible, but is the result of a Greek, yeah, we'll call it a mistranslation of the term maiden,
Mhm.
as virgin, where born of a virgin became the way that it was passed
Mhm.
down to those who were doing their theology in Greek.
Yeah, he did talk about in the beginning of the book. He mentioned C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity, uh, in that all humans have a moral system, and by and large, it is the same everywhere. And then, as he continued in his academic career, he recognized that um, that's not true. It's not the same
Yeah,
everywhere.
right, right.
Um, and yeah, I mean, he gave the example of pederasty. Uh, Certain times in Greek history as the most noble form of love. It's not
Argument
all
that
common. Yeah,
no,
and I
yeah,
think I think we see it in our society where at one time like um, you know interracial marriage was looked down upon. Jim Crow laws, slavery, roles of women in society. I mean, now we look back, most of us, they look back and like, man, that was, man, how could people think that? How
right.
could people believe in some of those, racist or homophobic or misogynist kind of thinking?
Yeah,
Changes.
so the idea I think was that Ehrman was saying that when he was an evangelical Christian, this was an argument that was often used to show that, the world has some sort of provable um, divine inspiration that wasn't just derived from human culture. And that is
Hmm.
this idea that somehow we all around the world developed it, simultaneously, the idea of morality. So there might be, some differences in moral, in not in mores, in culture or whatever, but not in like basic things in morality. And there may be something to that with certain things. So, you could kind of somewhat prove that just like wanton killing for no reason or whatever is not good, or like that kind of a thing. Uh,
Yeah.
but like, but there's very little, let's just say like that actually is universal. Like, and especially the kind of things that Jesus is going to be talking about, which is something along the lines of like, not only is it not okay to oppress people, that are, um, I know, less well off than you, or to press your advantage in any way, you actually have to work to undo that entire situation
Yes.
so that there's, I mean, that is clearly something that, is not at all universal. And so part of what Ehrman is showing is that in Jesus's time, this wasn't even universal. So he's looking at the Symposium, as you brought up, probably one of Plato's most popular dialogues, I would guess. But yeah, it's weird because it's in praise of love, but what seems to be proposed by most of the speakers at the symposium is a form of pederasty that seems pretty god awful to us nowadays. But it was thought of as this superior way of relating to another person, or the most loving way to relate to another person, because it was supposedly beneficial to both.
Right.
the um
Yeah.
uh the elder statesman who was like having this erotic relation with the younger teenage boy was like training this younger teenage boy for a life of public service and a life of like importance within the Greek polis. And so it was like considered to be mutually beneficial. And so like he also brings up Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, which has a lot of points of contrast with the Symposium. But and Aristotle was a student of Plato's, and they wound up having lots of disagreements about things. But he was trained by Plato for a very long
Mm.
time. And Aristotle wound up founding his own academy and all the rest of this kind of stuff because of disagreements. He wasn't going to be just another one of his disciples or whatever. But there was a lot of agreement. And so even though the Nicomachean ethics portrays what a good friendship is, totally different, or in that sense portrays what a loving relationship is totally different. So it's not it's the exempla gratis is not pederasty
Right.
in the Nicomachean ethics, because Aristotle thinks that, like, there's anything where there's like mutual benefit or whatever, giving
Mutual,
like that.
but equal
Yeah,
status.
yeah, right, yeah.
Right. So,
It's got to be of people of equal status, right?
right.
Yeah.
And I mean, he did mention the ideology of dominance, which was throughout all antiquity.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
it's the idea of those who are powerful should dominate the weak. Who decides what is right? Those who can. The morality of domination was indeed common sense of every level of society. You even see that today.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, on my social feeds, I, I get, maybe because I find it very interesting or like shocked when I hear it, but like independent fundamentalist Baptist preachers.
Yeah. There's
Yeah,
something.
those are interesting to listen to. But this guy was just saying how, like, he doesn't do counseling because if the wife is complaining about the husband, well, that's the husband's business because the husband's the head of the wife. Or kids,
Mm.
like if the kids are complaining, I'm going to believe the parents because parents have authority over the kids. So he was just like, I believe in authority. That's why I'm not a good counselor, whatever. But like just the idea of like you take the word of a person with authority over a possible victim,
Yeah.
and that wasn't that long ago where if a kid were to come forward and accuse an adult of abuse, you know, it seemed like society would like believe the adult over the child.
Yeah. Just because
Not
yeah.
that long ago that
No,
was kind
right.
of
Yeah.
the thinking. Um, you mentioned about with a symposium where it's a dominant figure of a male and a boy, and then the other with Aristotle,
Nicomachean
um,
ethics.
just how it's more of a mutual friendship, and that's something to be desired.
Yeah.
This person who is quote unquote below my social status is equal in worth and value, and should be treated as such. Like that
Yeah.
wasn't maybe a thing in Greek culture. So
Yeah, no, it wasn't for
yeah,
sure. Nor
yeah,
Roman culture. But like, yeah, and I mean, Aristotle even went so far as to say that if you had a friend and you shifted social classes for
mm,
whatever reason, you couldn't really be friends anymore because you couldn't
yeah,
like. I mean, like, for both, the one commonality between Plato and Aristotle is like this idea of like mutual benefit,
yeah.
mutually benefiting each other. Whereas Jesus is sort of like radical love of the stranger or service to the enemy, where the true act of love, you're not getting some at least really obvious transactional benefit back.
I do have it highlighted underneath Plato's symposium that the stated goal of the ascent is self improvement and personal happiness, not actions beneficial to others.
Right. Actually, like in the symposium, so there's two speeches that he focuses in on in the symposium, which are the two speeches that often get focused in on, is Aristophanes. And that's this myth that this famous playwright in Athens at the time tells at the symposium about like people being like two people basically joined together. It could be like two females, two males, male and female, but like they had become too powerful so that like Zeus broke them apart so that
Mm,
people nowadays just have like their two legs and their arms or whatever. They're just like a lot less powerful until they're rejoined back together in love with somebody else. So it's this idea again of love being mutually beneficial to the lovers. So when they're rejoined, they are just more powerful together as one.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and then the other speech that is often talked about in a symposium is, well, obviously Socrates' speech, and he is referring to a witch, it sounds like, or maybe a prophetess or something like that. Her name was Diotima. She seemed to have followers even in ancient Greece. But anyways, she told him that like basically, love, starts off, in a very basic sort of fleshly level of eros, and then, it gradually becomes philios or philos, where it's like more, brotherly love, concern for the other that's not sexual, and then it becomes this ultimate like agape, which is going to be a very important term in the New Testament. Again, Ehrman mentions this funny story because it was funny because it was told to me also by my
Oh.
Koine Greek professor. He was like, "Yeah, they have this whole thing about how like there's these different levels of love and eros and philos and agape, but it's not really
Hmm.
true." And actually, and I heard that too. Is like it took this book actually to Ehrman to say that actually is not true at all. The mostly in Greek society, it's used this way, so that eros does refer to a kind of like lower level fleshly love. Especially here in the symposium, it's clear how they're being referred to. Philios is a more purified version because it's less fleshly. And then agape is like no concern for the flesh. It's actually an escape from the
Yeah,
flesh.
but
Okay. Well,
yeah,
it is
right.
mentioned a lot in the New Testament for sure. And it's used for this in Jesus's teachings about loving each other.
Right. But as far as
Yeah.
like in classical Greek, it was mainly eros and
Hmm.
filio or philia. Or, I don't know. Yeah, and he did say those words are not just bound to like filio is like friendship, eros is more fleshly. Like he said that there's a lot more nuance to those words that they could mean things similar to agape.
Right. So
Yeah.
so like yeah, there are times when they're used interchangeably, but there's also at least in the symposium there's a sense in which Plato is defining different levels of love, and he's using
Yeah.
specific words for that. So agape, in the symposium would have been sort of more the form that it was intended in the Bible or in the New Testament.
Agape, as it turns out, is never used as a noun in pagan Greek writing.
Oh,
Its verb form means something like to cherish or value. The word first shows up as a noun in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which would be the Septuagint.
yeah.
But even there, it is used only a few times. It appears all over the New Testament and other early Christian writings. However, not in reference to love as an emotion, a passion, attraction, admiration, but as loving election, taking in the best interest of another. Agape, in other words, is a term for altruistic behavior.
Where we're showing distinctions between the sort of Greek thought that I guess a lot of the writers of the New Testament would have been familiar with, and Jesus' teachings, and maybe some of the problems with translation, and some of the ways in which things might be misunderstood if we don't take into account Jesus's Jewish context.
In very rough terms, we might think of Greek and Roman altruism as tribal, in that it was almost always directed toward those who were genetically or socially related.
So you might even think about this in terms of the Dawkins understanding of like the selfish gene isn't just selfish at the individual level. The selfish gene can, make sacrifice, love those that are similar to it. So, these are, you can, but people outside, you still kind of have this sort of radicality when Jesus introduces the idea of like, I guess in some ways going beyond your genetic programming and showing love to the stranger or to the enemy.
Yeah. And in this chapter, they also talk about forgiveness in chapter 3.
Forgiveness is this forgiveness versus atonement?
Yeah, forgiveness as a free gift was not part of moral discourse or practice in the Greek and Roman worlds. It was introduced in the Western world of Jesus. And the main point of forgiveness in the New Testament is something that's freely given, not as something that needs repayment or punishment, which
Right.
kind of goes against a lot of my foundational evangelical
Yeah.
beliefs of my sin deserves punishment. Jesus was
Yeah.
punished for me,
Yeah.
and God
Which
is
would be
free to
atonement,
forgive me.
not forgiveness. Yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense because he goes through different stories of someone just freely forgiving someone that's in debt, or someone who a son who the prodigal son coming back, and there wasn't any sort of sacrifice or punishment. So he gave a lot of scriptural support in how Jesus is teaching us to forgive freely with no punishment or atonement, and God does the same thing. But then he does, the irony is that almost immediately after Jesus' death, his followers reverted to traditional Greek and Roman views, abandoning his teachings on forgiveness and insisting on the importance of atonement, claiming that Jesus' entire mission, in fact, was to die for the sins of others in order to restore their relationship with God. Ehrman is saying that Christianity, yet again, took the ideas of the Greek and Roman world and applied it to their religion.
That's right. Yeah. So like there's just confusion of terms to some degree that you can see is not just like, ooh, mistranslation. It's like, no, there's a whole package that comes along with whatever term you choose. Ehrman is real polemical about this online. It's funny. He's got like a bunch of podcasts that will say stuff like Jesus hated atonement, stuff like that will be the title of the title of the thing or whatever.
I said
Which is
that'll
like,
get some views.
oh, he
I said
does.
that would get
Yeah.
some views.
And some comments too, like evangelicals absolutely love to hate Bart Ehrman. So, and or
Yeah,
biblical literalists or whatever. Because
right.
the game that Urban plays is like you're a biblical literalist, but I can out literalize the actual text and the words. Like I could be more literal than you could ever dreamed about. I'm going to
Like, do
expose
you
that you're
really want
not
to be
really a
literal?
literalist. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Do you
right.
really want to like leave your family, give away all your wealth, and follow Jesus? You want to take that literally?
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Of course,
exactly.
that's
Yeah.
take that metaphor. Hyperbole. That's hyperbole,
Right, right.
right?
Yeah, of course, conveniently. The relationship of love that Jesus promoted is one where the centerpiece is forgiveness. I don't know, healing some transgression via atonement is Greek, Roman, and mostly what had been taught previously by the Jewish tradition. Although in this next chapter 3, we're going to be seeing that there are seeds of what Jesus would come to teach already within the Jewish tradition. So he was teaching something radically new in many ways, but it's not like totally out of left field. But nonetheless, Ehrman shows that Jesus is, a move like one step beyond is kind of a step off a cliff because it's like, man, love your enemy is a whole different ball game, basically.
Chapter 4, the Jewish roots of Jesus's ethic. To truly understand Jesus' teaching, he must be viewed within his first century Jewish context, where the Torah was cherished as a joyful guide that emphasized worshiping God and caring for the vulnerable. Jesus' radical ethics, heavily shaped by Jewish apocalypticism, the belief that evil cosmic forces were temporarily controlling the world, but that God would soon intervene, judge humanity, and establish his eternal kingdom. Because Jesus believed this dramatic end was coming immediately or imminently, he called on his followers to urgently abandon their wealth, status, and personal ambitions in favor of an anti dominance lifestyle, directly opposing the surrounding Roman culture of power and authority. Jesus taught that true greatness comes from humility, self sacrifice, and serving the poor and outcast, an extreme moral vision that ultimately reshaped broader human values.
He starts off the chapter talking about just like the sort of anti-Semitism that is just like rife in most seminaries in the United States, even to this day. And just things that are taught to people about like Jews and the law, basically, how the law was like impossible to keep. It was like this oppressive,
Mm-hmm.
thing that like was always being rebelled against or whatever. Where he was saying like, actually, no, like this was a gift to the Jewish people, that and it became a gift actually to the Gentiles as well over time. Since most of us, um, are at least aware of the Ten Commandments, and our legal system is to some degree, formulated from a lot of what's in the Ten
Mm-hmm.
Commandments. What is Jesus's innovation? So for Paul, it was like, oh, Jesus is telling us like we don't need to follow the law. But for Jesus, he says, I came to keep the law. We'll just say in the most general sense for Paul, the law was the law of love that we were to keep, and not Torah necessarily, not kosher and all the rest of that kind of stuff. Like, so like that's what mattered. And he like Jesus, they just kind of articulated it differently. We're going off this same understanding of like moral law versus like ritual purity type laws and that kind of a thing. That was already starting to get differentiated, especially like, for example, in the prophets, as we already talked about. So the prophets seem to make this distinction between, God hates your sacrifices
Mm-hmm.
because you don't treat the poor right. So you can see the split. But Jesus says, I came to keep every jot and tittle and all the rest of that kind of stuff, depending on how you translate that. And I know Ehrman is very big on that. He meant that. Jesus was probably teaching something like a more intensified version of Judaism rather than any kind of a relaxation of the law. We were talking about a total intensification of the law. So the way Ehrman talks about, in the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus is saying stuff like, Moses told you not to kill your brother. I tell you, don't even say something bad about your brother. Don't even think a bad thought about your brother. Don't even say like he's a moron in your own mind, and that kind of stuff. Like that's a super intensification that leads directly to this idea of loving the enemy. And then again, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says, Moses taught you not to covet your neighbor's wife or whatever. But I tell you, if you've even looked, don't even look at a woman lustfully or whatever. So it's like this constant sort of set of intensifications. Of course, Luther taught that was like, oh no, what the reason why Jesus taught that was to show that the law was impossible to keep and that you're just going to fail trying to keep it. And so then that's going to make you fall back on, the law of love, the grace of love, that as a failure to keep the law, you have to rely, you have to crawl back to God's love, because you're not able to keep the law as it is or whatever. So that's just another example of how like the law became kind of seen as almost like a curse or like a setup just to fail. That piece in Paul, or there before the law there wasn't sin. So it's just like when
Yeah. Roman.
the law is both a blessing and a curse. Like all, it's a blessing because like it teaches you uh how to flourish as a human being, and how to and how to live a good life. And for Ehrman in this chapter, he's like very concerned with the Jewish idea that like God designed the world in a certain way, and when you live in accord to that, you're going to flourish, and your society is going to flourish. When you don't keep that law, you're going to be punished, and especially the moral laws. How you treat each other, treat the widow, treat the outcast, treat the stranger, or whatever. But like the reason why is because that's how heaven is. When we're in the kingdom of God, this is Jesus's idea. In the kingdom of God, there isn't inequality. In the kingdom of heaven, there isn't starvation. Ehrman says, kind of interestingly, that we have the capacity even now to like end starvation and all this other kind of stuff, but we don't have the will to do it. And
Yeah.
so, but we've, for him, because of Jesus's explaining this and teaching this to some degree, that there has been some movement in that direction from where, in the ancient world you have total indifference to the poor, even though that
Yeah.
was the majority of the population. It was just kind of like, that's where they're supposed to be or whatever. And if you, I think it was Seneca, who was a Roman thinker, said, and if you just gave money to the poor, that's kind of a waste of money. The only reason why you would do that, bread and circuses and whatnot, is to just keep them from like killing you,
Hmm.
because of this inequality. There's no sense that like there shouldn't be poor.
There's two purposes. One is how to worship God, and two, how to treat others in the community. I think you just read the Old Testament. I think that's what you see. I thought it was interesting when he mentioned the Maccabean revolt in the 160s BCE. How the idea was, well, if you're disobeying God, if you're not treating community members as you should, if you're not worshiping God properly, God will punish you. But then what they were experiencing is, well, we are keeping the law, and these things are still happening to us. There's violence and oppressive uh, nations, that they're experiencing, and so they kind of came up with powers that were opposed to God, and that led to more of kind of led to the development of Satan, the devil. Like there's these two opposing
The
forces.
adversary, right.
Not about what karma or the Deuteronomy, kind of
Yeah, it
like,
can't be about karma because you're doing the
yeah,
right thing.
you're
I
doing the
mean, it
right
wouldn't
thing,
be,
bad things are
yeah, right,
happening.
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
like there has to be some sort of spiritual force that's causing
opposed to doing
it.
the right thing,
Yeah.
or in rebellion against God and doesn't want to do the right thing or whatever. Yeah.
And then that came about the apocalyptic beliefs that God will intervene in human history and defeat the forces of evil, um, destroying them and sending them to eternal torment.
Yeah,
And
revenge on your enemies.
but then when but then Jesus would continually teach that about his kingdom, that it would come near, it's coming soon, but it never arrived, and so his followers had to alter his teaching in significant ways. That's what Ehrman said. When it never happened, when there's no apocalyptic kind of end time that they were expecting, then they need to like start writing things down. Yeah. So
Well, writing stuff down and also reinterpreting is like the biggest thing. So like whatever it meant to keep the law, and whatever it meant for the kingdom of God to be eminent, with an I. The idea here would just be that, we're back in that already but not yet kind of theology.
mhm.
So like we are nearer to the kingdom of God all the time through, loving service. And so it's a very specific ethic of service that's sort of different. So I mean, I'll just do the clearest, in my mind, differentiation here. So in the symposium, love is liberatory of you yourself. And you kind of mentioned this, but
Mhm.
and so it lifts you up out of this fallen world, this material uh, world, and it lifts you into the perfection of the heavenly realm, which is the realm of the forms or something like that. So you no longer have to deal with love's debasement in some erotic form in the flesh. Now it's been liberated of the material flesh, and so you are in this idealized, kind of like bodiless heaven. That's why you get some really kind of wild differences within Christianity and within, some of the Jewish communities, like the Pharisaic Jewish communities, who are talking about that there was going to be a bodily resurrection, as a part of this apocalypse. All the dead would return in the flesh, it's because, for a Jewish thinker, you cannot say that creation itself is bad or fallen. You have to affirm it. You have to
Mm.
affirm the flesh. And so, whatever redemption of the flesh means, it's going to mean that the flesh isn't just tossed away. So, there's all this complicated um, differentiation in Paul's theology between sarx as the sinful fallen flesh versus the soma body, which is the resurrection body, as like the new resurrection flesh. The overall idea here is that um, Jesus is saying you attain this through service to the radical other, to the outsider, to the person who's disregarded. That this actually, in some sense, earns you the kingdom. That submission to the needs of others, rather than consideration of your own, is somehow living in the kingdom. Um, Even though it may not appear that way or feel that way necessarily. That this I guess is just so different than the idea of like escaping this world by yourself and like
Yeah.
not looking back.
And that
This
was
is
more of
like,
a later development in Christian thought,
which one?
correct? Well, just the idea. Well, I'm just reading some passages that I highlighted that Jesus was not focused on personal happiness in his life, nor did he urge ethical behavior to promote the welfare of society for the long haul. Jesus expected the end of the age to come very soon. So Jesus taught his disciples to abandon their homes, spouses, children, family, jobs, and everything else to be his followers. And the end was imminent, and to enter the kingdom required a radical commitment. So that was kind of his teaching, because when you hear these radical, like sacrificial things of giving everything to the poor, it was because the end is imminent. Is why hold on to these things? Why get married? Kind of thing.
Yeah. and
Um,
and Ehrman also
why?
mentions that it earns you merit to get rid
Yeah,
of it. Like it
but
somehow like puts you in a higher spot in heaven.
but then it never happened. Jesus died. He rose, and then he had Paul. Perhaps was thinking the same thing about the end is imminent. But then, as all these Christians were dying off in the first century, it was almost you have to look back and say, well, how are we going to live this Christian life? And so I guess maybe they did. I mean, did they reinterpret some of
Yeah,
Jesus' teachings and
I think
kind of
so.
thing?
Yeah. I
Just
think right
like,
away there became this like question to Paul, like, well, there's people in our congregation here that are dying. So what about that, Paul? And
yeah,
he's got to figure it out and answer something about it. And as Paul thought he was going to get taken up, but as he got like closer and closer to his own death, he realized that wasn't going to happen, and it might not happen for him. And so, yeah, he had to scramble. So I think that's a totally legitimate move. I think that's this thing that people ask about, like, well, when the rapture fails to come for so many different communities over the history of the world, like, what happens to those communities? This is what they do. They just reinterpret things. It might be illegitimate to some, and I mean, some of it is kind of a bit off to me. So like, this is where Seventh Day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses, they all come from failed millennial predictions.
yeah,
And so and then having to scramble and kind of reinterpret what was meant. And usually the way it happens is something like, oh yeah, the temple was restored, but it was the temple in heaven, not here on the earth or whatever. But so, and then most groups who are really into the apocalypse nowadays, they just say something like, we don't make predictions about it anymore, but soon, kind of a thing.
yeah,
What had to be developed very specifically when the parousia failed to arrive, at least in the form that they imagined, was this already but not yet kind of an idea. And you see that in Paul. So like there's this sense of like, yes, our brothers are asleep, but when Jesus comes back and they, rise, like they're gonna, wake back up again or whatever. So like I was wrong about the idea that it was going to come in this generation or whatever. I was like, actually, Jesus said that, but Paul obviously thought that too. It reminds me actually of this famous Jehovah's Witness book that was written, I think it was in 1917, and it says like millions living now will never die. It's
Mhm.
almost like the same deal. Like, okay, well, it looks like that was wrong. Like, I kind of like it's to some degree that they retain like whatever it was they saw, whatever it was that Paul experienced, what was Jesus's vision for the kingdom of God, whatever that was. They just are sort of like reacting to the circumstances. I mean, and I'm very aware that most people who despise religion would think what I'm saying is totally illegitimate. I get that because it's like, well, it just didn't happen or whatever. But like, I think that the vision of both Paul and Jesus was one of radical love,
Yeah.
and so that to me, if that's revealed to you, it just takes a lot to try to figure out how to make that happen and flesh it, if you will, here on earth. And
Yeah.
so, as you are having to respond to different circumstances that come around, yeah, you got to scramble a bit. You got to think on your feet. You got to reinterpret. Or most churches nowadays, if it's a funeral, I don't care if it's a biblical literalist funeral or whatever. The most fundamentalist funeral on the face of the earth. They're talking about Grandpa sitting up with heaven right now because he like did knew the four laws or something like that. I like knew Jesus or whatever the heck. So like that's not the original idea. The original idea is the resurrection. So for those of us who kind of have to hold attention, the tension is just already but not yet. So that you can access that love, that kingdom, whenever you serve the other, but it's not a final or full realization of the kingdom yet. So that's the kind of like way that develops in Christian history, I guess.
Yeah, and I think what you can preserve in the teachings of Jesus is that he opposed the ideology of dominance, which was a common, very majority idea in his time. An ideology of service, being a disciple meant living in service and submission, giving up power, possessions, and self will. To become great requires giving up greatness. To become most important requires giving up importance. It is not uh, it is not the masters, but the slaves who are superior. Um, Jesus' ethical injunctions focus not on improving a benefactor's character and personal well being in life, but on assisting those in need. Well, what does it mean to give up, everything and give to the poor? And yeah, like would he have said that if he knew the end was not imminent? Would he have said that if he knew that
Mm.
there'd be 2,000 years after his death? Right? I mean, so we're just saying that Jesus was misinformed, I guess.
Somehow or another, he
I
got a
know that,
wrong idea in his head. Yeah, right.
yeah, we might get two or three comments on that, maybe. I don't,
And we're idiots because we haven't
yes,
realized that Jesus did come back. Apparently, the millennial period has occurred, and
yeah,
we're just sitting here in this wicked age with our
right.
wicked brains, denying what everybody else can see.
Yeah. But it's hard. I mean, it's obvious the Bible is not clear because we have like 40,000 denominations.
How dare you, Kevin?
It's like, and like, you know,
The
I,
Bible's clear. We have 40,000 denominations because of human sinfulness. So,
yeah, so,
anyways,
yeah, having the principle of love, seeing every human being as equal in value and in dignity and and fighting for the rights of others.
yeah, and I so like for Bart Ehrman, that is Jesus's innovation that has had real world effects that we'll
Yeah.
get to in later chapters. So there's this classic distinction between like what we can uncover through learning and discovery and the sciences and whatnot,
Mhm.
and what has to be revealed to us. And that's why for me there was a true revelation with Jesus. It's not like totally out of nowhere, disconnected from everything else, but it really is novel. This idea, I mean, it has been the thing that has informed my life, and I've I've been back and forth with it because it's really hard to try to live this out.
Yeah.
The idea that, like, look, the ultimate religious experience, the ultimate mystical experience, the ultimate whatever is not like getting taken up into the seventh heaven, or the third heaven, or whatever, however many heavens. It's not like the ascent that Plato describes, out of this flesh, out of this world. It's the opposite of that. It's a journey into this world,
Mm.
into this flesh, as a servant, and to other people, to your community, whatever, but also to those outside of your community. We can't perfectly instantiate that, I realize, and it's certainly not always a pleasure. That's why Jesus taught this isn't, going to be necessarily pleasurable. And the kingdom of God isn't just this, vision of heaven that you see even in, like, John of Patmos's Revelations. The kingdom of God is like self-sacrificial love. So it's
Yeah.
whatever that means. I'm trying to find out by, like, trying to live a certain way and make certain decisions as best I can. But, like, and it's been an interesting journey, to say the least.
Yeah.
But that's to me is like something that the flesh is not going to show you. That has to be revealed to you, because that's so different, so opposite than the determinations of our biology and our biological programming, whatever. It's not. It's not something that is readily obvious, and so it is. There is no question that it's going to be difficult to figure that out and to understand it and to try to live it out, and that all the communities ever, including the one at Acts, Jerusalem, and all the idealistic, utopic communities that have ever tried to live out any kind of idea of a kingdom of God have failed.
Yeah.
I just don't want to stop trying myself. I don't,
Mm.
because I just don't. I mean, there's nothing noble in it. I just don't see any other choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, the life of just, like, self, uh, and self consideration is, for me at any rate, become unlivable.
It is because it's human nature to want to preserve yourself and people closest to you. Um, but to move beyond that and knowing that you knowing knowing you can fail and probably will
Yeah.
is is a life worth living though. I mean, just